Good morning and welcome to Newsfile. This is your special edition, our quarterly Joy Change Speaker series. 6 years ago, there was a Diaspora summit in Accra. A Deputy Minister of Trade, Robert Ahomka-Lindsay, who himself had sacrificed, left his better-paying job abroad to return to make an impact and contribute, had this to say to the many Ghanaians who had returned for the purpose of that summit.
I will say some home truths that you may not like, but you need to hear it. Because as you make a decision to take this journey, you need to be aware of where you're coming from. So the first area I'm going to start talking about is you as a diasporan, your approach as you come back home. How do you approach it? Do you know something? Let me share something to you, and I will use a lot of British words here, so please forgive me. Nobody likes whiners. People that spend all their time whining all the time, I really get on people's nerves. So stop whining. Stop spending, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this, please, we know it doesn't work. So stop whining all the time saying it doesn't work. If it worked, you probably wouldn't be sitting there. So nobody likes whiners, so stop whining. The second point, it is not every time you want to make a decision, you have to see the minister, the deputy on every head. What is this thing? Where did this come from? Do you know how many people want to actually sit down and meet the Minister of Labor? Have you been to his office? There's hundreds of them. What is this thing like, I have to see you, give me your cell number? This phone doesn't stop ringing, yet we have an office. Your approach is important. When you are talking to people and you are talking down to them, you are not likely to get a lot of reception coming the other way. Remember, phonetics. There's a reason why they invented the word phonetics. The way you speak English is different the way I speak English now. So understand that some of the colloquialism that you use are not what is used here. Think about your approach as you approach this opportunity to bring what you have learned and gained to bring forward.
As he spoke to those hard facts and truths, he got a response from one of our guests today, who also had attended that summit to consider his options of returning to Ghana, Kofi Koranting.
You are right. We have the money and we have the expertise. We came here to sit with the decision makers to formulate policy to help us integrate us into the system. Where are the decision makers?
But it was there already. It's been there since morning.
Where are they? They are nowhere around here to listen to us. So now everything we talk about here is going to be second and third class. It's going to be washed out, and whatever is left is going to be passed on to the decision makers. Everybody comes in here and has an attitude that, oh, I got something better to do. Well, if this is the biggest now, if you're a business person and you know that there is a constituency that has the most amount of money and the most amount of expertise that you need into your business to make it work, I would have thought you would spend more time with that constituency to get them to do something. There is nobody here. The decision makers are not here. So we need to change this mindset. And if you would let the president know, this attitude and this arrogance about we are whiners. Really? Who travels 3,000 miles to be a whiner? We could have been whiners from our constituencies. We didn't need to come here. So this attitude has to change. If you want to engage us, then be serious about engaging us, because we're not here to play.
This country is blessed with a lot of talent. A good number of that live abroad, some work abroad, some live abroad, work in Ghana, some do both. In their interactions with their country, how do they see the things we see and talk about every day? What perspectives can they share to help all of us improve this country? Today's Joy Change Speaker Series is dubbed the Diaspora Edition. We'll be right back to introduce our guests to you. Accomplished Ghanaians, some who are back home and some who are still out and seeking to help. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Joy Change Speaker Series 6, the Diaspora Edition. We have assembled 7 global citizens dealing with the theme, Towards the Ghana I Seek. We want to get their perspectives of the issues that confront us and what can be done to change mindsets, cultures, habits, behaviors, including of the government. Mary Spew, deep space engineer, CEO and founder, Seek Metaverse. Dr. Elikem Tamaklo, managing director, Nyaho Medical Center. Sulemana Isifu, microbial ecologist and social activist. Kofi Koranting, 2024 presidential hopeful, New Vision Movements. You heard him not long ago. Ibrahim Mahama, not the Ibrahim Mahama you know associated with politics. Author and artist. Dr. Arthur Kobina Kennedy, physician, author and activist. Nana Ofosua Oforiata Eyim, writer, filmmaker, and art historian. Now, our first change speaker, Mary Spew, is a deep space engineer and holds more than 10 technology patents in virtual reality, real-time streaming, and spatial audio. Mary is the inventor of the world's first 4D audio headphones for music, VR, sports, ASMR, and more. Additionally, she's the author of It Is Not Rocket Science, 7 game-changing traits for uncommon success, Penguin, as well as a scientific reviewer for the Department of Defense and a U.S. Department of State speaker. She is the founder of Seek Metaverse, a blockchain platform that enables live coaching from world-class experts. Mary helped create Boeing's industry-changing digital cinema technology, revolutionizing how movies are streamed today. Currently, Mary is on the board of Meta Oculus VR for Good, and the technologies she invented has been used by Microsoft, Xbox, Universal Music, Lucasfilm, and more. Take a look at her. How are you inspiring that daughter of yours to make magic? And she's made very big magic. Because of an emergency, she's unable to join us today. But Mary Spew joins us in our first quarter next year. Here in the studio, I have our next change speaker, Dr. Elikem Tamaklo. He's the managing director of Nyaho Medical Center, a leading healthcare provider in Ghana and the first private group medical practice in the country. He has held this position since 2015, and during this time, he has led the digital transformation of the hospital, integrating services, equipment, and infrastructure through an integrated hospital information system centered around patients and their families. I've used their services, and I can testify. Dr. Elikem Tamaklo has won many awards, including the Young Entrepreneur of the Year at the 2016 Ghana Entrepreneurs Award and the Young Business Leader Award at the 8th edition of the All African Business Leaders Awards, organized in Johannesburg, South Africa in 2018. In 2022, Dr. Elikem Tamaklo emerged as the winner of the Man of the Year Health Award by Amy Africa, as well as the 40 Under 40 Health Award winner by the 40 Under 40 Awards. This morning he joins us. He's right here in Ghana, joins us to speak to Ghana's future, Ghana's legacy, addressing the talent and leadership gaps in Ghana's healthcare. Dr. Elikem Tamaklo, thank you very much for making time to join us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So we thought it was not going to be easy to find you because we were aware that you're a globetrotter. So good to have you.
No, it's a pleasure, honestly.
And what a beautiful and amazing thing you are doing in Nyaho, Hospital. Now speak to us on Ghana's future, Ghana's legacy, addressing the talent and leadership gaps in Ghana's healthcare.
No, thank you so much. I mean, it is an honor to be here. When I look at the clips you've shown and the people who've spoken, it really is inspiring because we are all inspired by people who've gone before us. And when I came to the organization, Nyaho, I did not start it. It was founded by my father, and my mother then took after him. And I realized that, the heights, my father used to say, the heights that were reached and kept by great men were not attained by sudden flight, but they, whilst their companions slept, were toiling upwards through the night. And my father was a giant. He was a diaspora. Before Ghana gained its independence, he was one of the few Ghanaians who were trained outside in Ireland, in Trinity College, before Ghana had its own medical school. And when he trained as a doctor, he came back. And he came back to serve in the military, in 37 Military Hospital. He rose to become the medical director for the Ghana Armed Forces. So when I look at his achievements, the question is, why did he move outside of this secure future to set up a very risky endeavor of starting a group medical practice? He didn't start it on his own. He brought people together. And that teamwork is what I believe has kept the organization going for 53 years. 53 years of running an organization that is 24 hours is no easy feat. So you look at the organization now and you think, it does not have problems. It has many problems, many challenges. It has gone through the ups and downs of our 70s, 80s, 90s, and different people were there. So when we look at the problems that we face now, it is for the team that is in place, the people who are there now, to figure out solutions and provide a support, a solution for the future generations that are going before us, because we are stewards. So I see myself as, standing on the grounds, which is the ceiling that my father and my mother have created, which is very much challenging. And we have to acknowledge that we are all stewards, and it is not easy to continue a legacy. If you grew up in a family, I think that all of us look up to our parents, we look up to those around us. Sometimes we have good examples, sometimes we have bad examples. We look at our governments and we look at people in leadership, and we look at what is the model of leadership that we have. I think that we can look and see great examples. I'm inspired personally by someone who was on your show, Patrick Ewa, who started Ashesi University. And one thing that is consistent, when you study the stories, you see that it has been challenging, and the challenge continues. There is something about resilience and perseverance that in order to change the things that we see, it does not take just chance. It takes perseverance, it takes hard work. And we need to show this hard work. We need to show the impact it has on your mental health, the impact it has on your being a family man, being there for your family. And so for me, this topic is about how do we address the challenges in healthcare. Because what brought me back to Ghana, I trained in the UK, but what brought me back was to identify that I had a part to play in this problem. If we train doctors and doctors leave the country, it is a challenge. Nurses and doctors, we know in the news today, in the last few years, there have been an increased flow of doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals who are moving out of our country to other parts of the world. And there are many reasons for that. All of them want to have a better life. They want to develop their skills. And to develop your skills, you have to go to where those skills are being taught. That is happening outside of our country. In order to create a better value for your family, to do better, sometimes the opportunities are there and you have to take the opportunities. So when we look at these problems, we have to understand what is the root issue. It is not because Ghanaians don't want to see Ghanaian healthcare improving, it's because there are real challenges and they're trying to find solutions. But that poses a problem for our healthcare delivery. The WHO and the Ministry of Health have identified that Ghana will not be able to achieve universal healthcare coverage if this is not tackled properly. We know that the Ministry of Health has been looking at skills and labor gaps, what is required for our healthcare labor market to improve. The Ghana Health Service is trying to increase jobs, is trying to increase wages, is trying to look at how to give people time off to study. But is that enough? And for me, my assessment of the situation is that that is not enough because it does not address the root issue. Why do people leave in the first place? People leave because situations here are challenging. I work in the private sector, and in the private sector, I can tell you that the last 2 years, no, actually, the last 3 years with the COVID pandemic, private sector struggled because there was no funding. You had to find a way of engaging and doing what you were called to do to save lives. No doctor and no nurse is not oblivious to the fact that you have to save the life in front of you. But when you are tired, when you are not addressing the mental health strain, to ask someone who is worried about their livelihoods, who's worried about the base, how to supply food for my family, and ask them to aspire to a greater height of thinking, of empathy, you have to address the root issues. And so as a private organizations, this has been a challenge, especially with the economic crisis. How do we create better jobs, better conditions of service? I can tell you and honestly that we have struggled in the last few years to provide that for our staff. However, we have not given up, and that is the legacy of my parents. When I look at the situations that they faced, if they could do it, we can do it. Even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it's a shadow, we will walk through it. But it takes perseverance, it takes hard work, and we need to demonstrate to the youth, we need to demonstrate to everyone who's coming in that it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of sleepless nights. So I am looking at the situation, I'm asking myself, how do we solve this? Because public sector cannot do it on its own. The government has so many competing interests that how do you put the right resources to address the challenge? The first challenge is we don't train enough healthcare professionals. That is really challenging when you have only 8 undergraduate medical programs. Our doctor to patient ratios are the lowest if you look at the world, if you compare to other parts of the world where people are moving to, there's a global health shortage. So if the UK has a global health shortage, yet the doctor-to-patient ratio is high, and we are coming from a low base, it begs the question that we're not tackling the supply and demand question, that we need more supply. But we have a young population. We have an opportunity. It's not a problem if you change the lens. It's an opportunity. We have a young population who are looking for jobs, who are looking to better themselves. So we need to focus on training and training more people to become better skilled. It's not enough to do the basic training. People have to aspire to better, because around the world, people have moved on. So if you try and just train on basic community care, I am not saying that that is not needed in a country where we have to deal with the basics, infection and prevention control, where simple hand hygiene, simple mosquito nets can make a difference. We have to lay a great foundation. However, with the use of technology, with the use of artificial intelligence, the world is moving on to giving tools that can help people do more and better. So it means that if we do not keep up in terms of how we train and how we empower and enable these young people, we'll be teaching things that were relevant 10, even 5 years ago. Meanwhile, the speed of evolution is moving quickly. So there is value in engaging in the diaspora. There is value in engaging in what's happening around the world, because it's combining the two things, bringing the best of our people who have gone out of the country, who are in these new systems, to the best in our country, who are aspirational, who are full of grit and resilience, who keep pushing on, and bringing them together. So the public sector cannot do that on its own. Private sector cannot do this on its own. Private sector is challenging. The tax regime, when I look at my relationships, I'm the chair of a group of specialist hospitals who came together during the COVID pandemic, because we had to engage. We are not competitors. We are all in this together. We don't even do the simple things that you can find in other countries. So we have to figure out what is the root issue. The policy regimes need to change. If your cost structure, if the cost of electricity, the cost of water, the cost of bringing equipment which are made outside the country, which are dollar denominated, the equipment that you use, your CT scans, your x-rays, all of these are dollar denominated. If you are bringing in people who want better paid jobs and you want to train them, you need to put money towards their training. And if they're going to be traveling, you're going to be paying flights, you have to pay accommodation. How do you look at this cost structure, which is dollar denominated, which is heavy, and try and get revenue that can even sustain that? A lot of hospitals compromise with quality. Instead of doing continuous professional development, it's a choice between paying for drugs or developing people. And so this is something that the government can help with by working together and looking at the policy regimes that create a fair and enabling environment. A public hospital should not be cheaper to run than the private hospitals. All need to be in the same playing field to allow for the right investment in people, in developing our people, so that we can create a good quality healthcare system. So we need the two. And I think I'm beginning to show my theme that it's about the people who are in the country and the people who are out of the country. It's about the public sector and it's about the private sector. It's about the teamwork. And this has been my analysis of Miaho. How could an organization survive for 53 years, despite the challenges that we've gone through coups, through a famine, through different challenges? And it's continued because of teamwork. It's been because people have put aside their differences and looked for what is common and what connects us all to solve a bigger problem than our own individual problems. So I'm extremely passionate when I look at this problem, because it is solvable, but it takes humility, it takes hard work, it takes persistence. We should not give up. It will take time. So I look at countries and I'm excited because we have examples in the world. I know people talk about Singapore, but I would like to talk about Cuba. Cuba as a country is a case study because Cuba is a net exporter of its healthcare talent, a net exporter because over the years, they made certain decisions. They were going to develop their people. So they trained a lot of doctors and a lot of nurses. Cuba, for me, is interesting because they did not see that brain drain as a problem. They saw it as an opportunity. So Cuba has $11 billion, at last count, I was reading an article, $11 billion of revenue that is generated through bilateral agreements with countries. They export over 50,000 doctors in 67 countries. These are relationships where the countries pay Cuba to export its talent. That means that that is an acknowledgement that people are going to be going to other countries. But there's a way that the country can benefit if they can actually formalize the agreements and get paid so that they can use that amount of money to train more people to replenish. I think that policy is interesting and should be studied and should be asked, what does it take for us to do this? Because if I look at Cuba, we have Cuban doctors in Ghana. Cuba, I mean, it's an amazing, their life expectancy is better than the US. People live longer if they live in Cuba than in the US. It's worth asking if Ghana is exporting, and at last count, over 50% of all doctors who've been trained in Ghana are outside of Ghana. And over 24% of nurses who've been trained in Ghana are outside. So if we can acknowledge that this is a problem that can be solved, but will take creativity and an entrepreneurial spirit, I think we can find a solution.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elikem Tamaklo. And he is very clear about one thing. It is a challenge to train medical professionals who won't stay. One of the reasons they won't stay, very obvious. They're looking for better opportunities. He says there are only 8 undergraduate medical programs. That's woefully inadequate for a population with a lot of younger people looking for better opportunities. You need to go beyond training in only the basics. And you just referred to how over 50% of the medical professionals trained in this country are not here. So, your major solution to that is what exactly? I like your perspective about this particular scripture. You said that in the valley, it's only a shadow of death and not death.
Yes.
In 2005, I did a documentary for the BBC. I included one of our speakers who will be joining us, Dr. Arthur Kennedy, and I discovered, to my shock, that the doctor population, Ghanaian doctors in New York, were far more than the total of the doctors we had right here in Ghana. What do you say is the one bullet to resolve this?
It's hard to say one bullet. Allow me to give 3 key areas. 1, the policy framework, the environment has got to be such that we make it easy for Ghanaians who have family members here. Ghanaians are not, we care about our country. I was in the diaspora, I care about my country. My family are in this country. So diaspora, the doctors in New York, care about their family. And if engaged, how do we create a framework that makes it easy? Because right now it's difficult for doctors to come and even work in Ghana. Yes, you have to do a number of steps. So let's look at what are the blockages for people to come back, even if they're giving back medicine's an apprenticeship. They have the skill. So see one, do one, teach one. They've seen it. They should do it in the country and teach someone else. They can keep on going back, but their legacy, let's make it easy. We need both public sector, but private sector is where the funding, entrepreneurial spirit comes from. We need to bring that connection together. Number 2, we need to look at financing. If we do not tackle the job situation of people being better paid, then that is still going to result in a net export. I believe that we need to acknowledge that people are going to leave. How can we find a revenue generation stream that can bring some revenue back. And I think that is with thinking through how we structure our jobs. I think that is where I'm looking at engaging Diaspora to do that, but I need to work with a team. We need to be a part of the conversation. It takes the last thing, unity. We are all in this together. If my mother falls sick, during COVID, we saw this. If my mother falls sick, I told her that in our hospital, even though we're a COVID center, we only had 2 ventilators and patients were on those ventilators. I said to my mom, I cannot do anything if you fall sick because we do not have enough. So stay and be safe. I think that we have to tackle the infrastructure problem as well. And that's where the investment, the enabling environment is skill plus equipment and infrastructure. So I think that this is my 3 areas: policy, training, and investment.
That's how to bridge the gap. Now, you were trained in the UK, had better opportunities, and still you decided, like a few others, to come home. Mm-hmm. For you, the push factor, or is it the pull factor? You said you're standing on the grounds, which is the ceiling created by your father and his team. Up to this point, do you have any regrets, or you are seeing the problems as only a shadow in the valley and not death?
The valley, I love that phrase because the valley of the shadow of death. I think that I'm a Christian, so I take a lot of faith from the Bible. And for me, the only way I've been able to go through this period of time has been with grace. And I say that because it's been extremely challenging on my mental health. My mental health in terms of anxiety is the shadow of death. It's not death. So I'm not dead.
Right.
But that shadow is causing fear and anxiety. And we do not tackle this topic in leaders. A lot of leaders are isolated. They are supposed to be the big man, the strong man. They are supposed to take care of other people. No one is looking out for them. And so I think that my lesson learned, and one thing I say for all leaders, acknowledge your mental health. Acknowledge that you're human. If you do not take time to rest, if you are out of the game, everyone in your organization cannot get through this. So you need to take care of yourself first. Give yourself oxygen before you can give other people oxygen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elikem Tamaklo. He's Managing Director of Nyaho Medical Center, a leading healthcare provider in Ghana and the first private medical practice in the country. He just spoke to us on Ghana's future, Ghana's legacy, addressing the talent and leadership gaps in the healthcare sector. We will go to our next change speaker right away. Our next change speaker is Sulemana Isifu. He's a young academic and a scientist. He has expertise in plant microbe interaction, microbial ecology, metagenomics, or environmental microbiology, and sustainable agriculture. He's a research fellow of the Hans Ruthenberg Institute of the University of Hohenheim, Germany's leading life sciences research university. Sulemana is also a climate change activist who has led advocacies through the Center for Climate Change and Food Security, where he's a founding member and the director of research, to influence policies and raise awareness about climate change in Africa. Aside his expertise as a microbial ecologist, he is a strong social activist and an anti-corruption crusader who believes in accountable governance. Sulemana has written many articles on corruption and publicly shared his views on pressing national issues in Ghanaian tabloids. He's speaking to us today. Is Ghana's ecosystem at a tipping point? Thank you very much, Sulemana, for making time to join us. Please unmute your microphone.
Sorry. Thank you, Samson, for having me.
And I've been following you a bit, checking up where you have been. I think you have been somewhere in the UK, you have been elsewhere, and you also were speaking, was it to Deutsche Welle, on the matters of environment and climate change very recently. Where are you speaking to us from today?
Today I'm speaking from Stuttgart, Germany.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I discovered you are a fellow of a particular institute that went on a certain research to the UK. Remind me of that again.
Yes. So for the UK, I went to the UK as a visiting researcher and scholar at University of Aberdeen. My institute actually in Germany here also embarked on a very important research in Ghana. And I would like to share some of the details of this research with your listeners and probably raise awareness about this particular research, which has been forgotten by policymakers. So
let's hear you. Is Ghana's ecosystem at a tipping point?
Okay, so thank you very much, Samson. So thank you for deeming me worthy of invitation, and I'm very pleased to be on a panel with distinguished fellows. So when this invitation was given, I decided to ask a few people within my circles of academics, intellectuals, friends, and my question was very simple. I asked them, if you were given the opportunity to isolate one problem of Ghana, which demands or which needs urgent attention, what problem are you going to mention? And to my utter shock, I had diversity in the opinions that I received from my respondents. So because of that, I said, okay, then let me fine tune the question further so that maybe I can have a consensus response from my respondents. So I drilled the question down by asking, okay, I want you to mention one problem that if it were solved, the effect of it would permeate every sector of the Ghanaian system. And even with this very specific and direct pointed question, I still did not have consensus. So what that told me was that the problems of Ghana are really myriad, and that if you were to put everybody or anybody in charge of Ghana, everyone would have everyone will have their own opinions on what should be solved, what problem demands urgent attention. So then I devised a theory myself and said that then I believe that everybody should work towards their own visions for Ghana. So that if you're a lawyer, you have to work to make the judiciary a very clean system. If you are an environmental scientist, you have to work to make the environment, Ghana's environment, worthy of consideration. And if you are a medical doctor, like your guests, you have to work to improve the health delivery system in Ghana. So everybody should work in their respective areas of interest with the hope that collectively, by working in your areas of interest, if you're a journalist, by working in the area of your interest, collectively would have the Ghana that we desire. So Samson, the question was towards the Ghana that I seek. So I have a wish list. I want to see Ghana where policy is informed by science and research, and not by political sentimentalism, and not by only political consideration. That is number one, the kind of Ghana that I want to see. I also want to see a Ghana where public institutions work professionally in the strategic interest of the state and not in the strategic interest of any one individual. My third wish list is I want to see a Ghana where young people can achieve their aspirations, can achieve their ambitions without having political godfathers, so that opportunities are only given to people who know someone somewhere up there. I don't want to see a Ghana like that. So these are the three wish lists that I have. And now to my question as to whether Ghana's ecosystem is at a tipping point. This is a very difficult question, because when you look at the ecosystem, the ecosystem is an interaction of all biological organisms and their physical world. And the ecosystem has specific services or have some special services that it renders to the people. And once you tilt the balance in the ecosystem, you are likely to have a situation where human beings are going to suffer. So the minor things that are in the environment, the microorganisms in the soil, these are the things that sustain human lives. And if we don't take care of these things very well, we are all going to suffer for it. And basically, there are two things. And when we say a tipping point is a point where the ecosystem can no longer absorb or can no longer resist the perturbations or the disturbances that have been pushed on it. And this can come from two main sources. It could be from the natural or artificial. The natural includes, for example, climate change. And the artificial usually are anthropogenic, which means that these are things or these are perturbations or disturbances that are imposed by human activities. And these human activities are very important whenever we talk about protecting the environment and protecting the ecosystem from reaching the tipping point. Because the tipping point has consequences that most times are very debilitating. One of the consequences of reaching the tipping point or crossing the tipping point threshold, I have defined what the tipping point is. One of the consequences is that you lose essential biodiversity. A second consequence is that the ecosystem has its own way of regulating itself and making it habitable or making it to support, it has a way of regulating itself in order to support human life and human existence. So once you perturb it or you disturb it, then this regulatory function of the ecosystem is lost. So for example, water purification, the underground water, the water table, the ecosystem has a way to purify the water table and make it drinkable for humans. And once you disturb the ecosystem, you are going to lose all of these. And at this point, I would love to ask your producer to show a short clip, and then we see if Ghana is pushing ourselves today. So Samson, what you're seeing, or viewers, what you're seeing is a shot that was taken recent as 9th December on the white Volta. I got this video from Metro TV. And for anybody who is watching this, this is the white Volta that has become turbid, that is almost in a slurry state, which depicts that Galamsey has not been solved. So we still have Galamsey going on, and by continuously doing Galamsey, we would be pushing Ghana's ecosystem to the tipping point. And I've mentioned some of the consequences of crossing the tipping point threshold. We lose biodiversity. This biodiversity is very important because, for example, in our agricultural system, some microorganisms are responsible for plants to be able to take up nutrients. And once you disturb the ecosystem, you lose these microorganisms. And the effect is that we are going to see what we call crop failures. We are going to see crop epidemics. Then this will threaten your food security system and make agriculture very expensive to undertake. So when you have Galamsey going on, I will not be surprised that in the next few years, we are going to see crop failures. Our plants are going to die. They will not be able to survive in the ecosystem because the ecosystem has been disturbed, and our important microorganisms and biological organisms that sustain the plant life, which in turn sustain the human life, are going to be lost. And this is why I was surprised when we had a professor who came up with evidence to show that mercury ingestion, which he said he traced to mining areas, had led to deformed babies. And yet the outrage from the Ghanaian people was one of indolence, one of quietism. So we did not show enough outrage. I'm here to disturb the peace of Ghanaians more and to tell them that if we continue this trajectory, the regulatory function of water purification, the ability of the ecosystem to purify the water table and make it drinkable to all of us, we are going to lose it. And that is why you have many studies saying that if we continue in this trajectory, in the next 20 years, we will not have drinking water, both surface and underground. And it is because the ecosystem would have crossed the tipping point. And mostly, when the ecosystem crosses the tipping point, you are unable to reverse it. Or even if you're going to reverse it, it will take extreme effort to be able to reverse it. And I asked myself, why would we wait to reach that point where we have to struggle and spend meager and scarce resources of the state to be able to reverse something that we should be able to stop it right now or never? And I'll ask the producer to show the next video, where my institute undertook a research, and fortunately there were Ghanaian scientists on this project, but this project was initiated by the German government, who initiated and funded this project known as the Mercury project, or Legumes for Choice project. And this project basically looks, and this project was reported by Joy FM actually. This project basically looks at how to use what we call phytoremediation or bioremediation to remediate soils that have been contaminated by lead, mercury, and other heavy metals from these artisanal mining or galamsey illegal mining areas. In Samson, I must tell you a story. I have some challenges, professional challenges, but I would say it anyway in the interest of Ghana. When I was first recruited in my institute, and my PI, the principal investigator on the project, was showing me around and introducing people to me. He introduced someone who would later become a very close friend of mine, Yachin, who is a Chinese lady. And my PI told me that, so this lady is responsible for screening microorganisms that have the potential to rehabilitate soils that have been contaminated as a result of artisanal mining. And he told me that this lady is using Ghana as a case study. So, I mean, my intuitive nationalistic sense asked, the conflict that arose in my mind, that the Chinese was responsible for investigating how to use microorganisms, specifically fungi, to remediate soils that have been contaminated, and galamsey sites in Ghana are the study sites. I don't want to explain, or I don't want to stress this any further, but I mean, the kind of conflict that I would have as a Ghanaian in my mind. And I waited 2 years later when I went to the field with my PI. I reminded him of what he told me, and then told him my challenge as a Ghanaian when I saw my friend Yachin being responsible. But there are Ghanaians on this project, Samson, and they have been able to identify candidate microorganisms that have the potential to immobilize, or that have the potential to stop the uptake of mercury by plants. Now, when the mercury is taken up by the plants, mind you, the mercury stays in the tissues of the plant, which means that if you are in Accra and the mining area is in, let's say, any galamsey site anywhere in the world, or in Ghana, you could have mercury right on your table while you are eating, because the plants have the ability to take up the mercury and translocate it or put it in the tissues of the plant. So if it is tomato that is coming from the galamsey site, you would have mercury right on your dining table. You'll be ingesting or eating mercury. And that is why Professor Sampeni found that babies were being born with deformities that he says throughout his professional career had never seen a similitude of it. And yet Ghanaians were not outraged. So the point is that with the continuous galamsey, and I say that galamsey is not an overflogged issue, because any matter that is of existential consequence cannot be overflogged and must be spoken about forever and ever until that action is completely dwarfed or completely defeated. anything that has existential consequences, we must continue to fight it until it is no longer, because once it exists, it means that human lives are at risk. And that is why I have a very beautiful definition of a galamsey, which I want to read to Ghanaians. I say that a galamsey is a voracious person who is driven by avarice and only satisfies his insatiable greed by destroying the very things that sustain human existence, i.e., water, environment, ecosystem, etc. A galamsey puts gold ahead of human life and sets out to pollute the environment deliberately with heavy metals like mercury and lead. A galamsey excavates an entire community in order to get few grams of gold. A galamsey is a selfish, cruel, wicked, and vicious person. The similitude of a galamsey is Adolf Hitler. A galamsey is in fact an environmental terrorist. And I know that every country has anti-terrorism law. And if we are going to consider galamseys as environmental terrorists, then we should have anti-environmental terrorist laws to curtail galamseys who are putting all of us at risk. The question as to whether Ghana's ecosystem is at a tipping point cannot be answered. The reason is simple. We have not made sufficient use of science to collect data on biodiversity that we have. The last check that I made, our biodiversity data was collected as far back as 1965. And since then, we don't have, for example, a national bank of data on essential microorganisms that exist in Ghana that make life habitable for plants, which in turn make life habitable or life possible for humans. And because of this, I told a friend, I think Dr. Kwame Sapon Asidu, I had a discussion with him. And I told him that even in future, if Ghanaians decide to be rational and decide that we have to revisit the reclamation of our galamsey destroyed site, I doubt if we'll be able to do the reclamation because what exactly we have lost, we don't know. So what microorganisms we've lost, we don't know. We don't have the data on that. So when we say we want to reclaim, what is the baseline for reclamation? What exactly are we going to reclaim? We will not be able to do that.
Right.
And this is a source of worry. And that is why I say I want a Ghana where state institutions work in the strategic interests of our country. And as someone in the diaspora, we cannot be reticent. We cannot say we don't care about Ghana because we have families in Ghana and we intend to relocate in Ghana to assist in the forward march of our country. And before I conclude, I want to state also very briefly whether our state institutions have also reached a tipping point. And when I say a tipping point for state institutions, very briefly in 1 minute, it is the point where people accept the fact that state institutions don't have to act. They have to be indolent. They don't have to be efficient. If we reach that point, then our state institutions are in trouble. And I use the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat as an example. I propose that we should scrap the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat and constitute it into an authority regulated by law, because the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat has become an institution for tokenism, and their strategic role in Ghana is missing. We need to reassess if we really want to keep it under the presidency, where the Scholarship Secretariat is rather used to promote party faithfuls. I believe that the Scholarship Secretariat can be structured in a way to fill the human resource gap that we have. Why should Ghana, for example, be hiring engineers to assist in some projects? Why should Ghana be hiring lawyers in some cases at international levels? Why should Ghana be hiring doctors at some for some particular treatments? If the Scholarship Secretariat plays a strategic role in Ghana's development, we will be able to fill all these human resource gaps. And that is why we must put in place stringent accountability mechanism for the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat, so that the report on how many people have been given scholarships, why they were given the scholarships, have they returned back to Ghana, have they been integrated, and what role are they playing since they returned to Ghana? This is a very important step that we need to take if Ghana would become the Ghana that we want.
Thank you
thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much,
Sulemana. I have only one question for you because we have done a bit over your time. You say that the biodiversity data that we have is one we collected in 1965. What's the standard within the periods by which this data is supposed to be collected?
So, Samson, there's no standard, but then as a country, we must have this data reviewed, every now and then, because the ecosystem, you don't have control over the ecosystem. So you would want to know what you have and be able to refill it whenever you lose it.
So what's the reasonable period within which
the
intervals?
The reasonable period, I would say, it must be a continuous process. So, for example, in Europe, and you know that I'm involved in an European project that is investigating what we call nature-based solutions. So in Europe, for example, every now and then, there are studies going on to discover new, new biota or new biomes. So it must be a continuous process. But even if we don't have the resources to do that, at minimum, every 15 years, I propose that we should have, and especially in the areas that we are disturbing, in the Galamsey areas, immediately, I am proposing to the government to move in immediately and begin to collect data of the biodiversities around those areas, so that when we become rational people and we want to restore those areas, we will be able to do so because we will know exactly what we've lost.
I said one question, but you have referred accurately to what the physicians have told us, that Galamsey has led to situations where we are now having deformed babies. And still, you say we are not at the tipping point?
Yeah, so the tipping point would come when revegetating the areas that have been destroyed becomes impossible. The tipping point would come when our water is not able to self-purify, so that our underground water is poisoned. I'm not sure if we've reached that point because we don't have the data to show whether we've reached that point or not. Our physician, probably in the health ecosystem, we've reached the tipping point. But in the classical definition of the environment and ecosystem, we are yet to know, because government is not even investing in,
regardless of the fact that
but as to whether we've reached or crossed the tipping point threshold, it requires very thorough scientific inquiry.
Thank you very much. Sulemana Isifu is a young academic and a scientist, and his expertise in the areas that he has chosen to speak to us about on the topic is Ghana's ecosystem at a tipping point. We will take a quick break. We'll return to introduce our next guest. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, as always, we put Ghana first. Today, as we always do every quarter, we take a pause from our normal paneling or empaneling to deal with a carefully selected panel that helps us to reflect. And I hope you're enjoying these global citizens so far. This program is brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. Europlus, producers of quality PVC and HDPE pipes and water tank. Where Europlus goes, water flows. DBS Industries, roofing, Papa Fie. My Way Insurance, dial *165# on MTN to join My Way today. Syntex Tanks, it is strong, it's tough. Flamingo Paints, simply superior. SNITC, Self-Employed Enrollment Drive. It's your future, so own it. Hoptel, it's everything you. And Door Masters, they pay for the show. and we are grateful. So you've heard Dr. Elikem Tamaklo, beginning with Mary Spew, the engineer doing a lot of magic by the encouragement and the inspiration of a father. You've heard Dr. Elikem Tamaklo heading the leading private medical center and doing amazing stuff, and the issues that he identifies that need working at. I'm sure we've all been at them in one mind that for a country that is training medical professionals in their numbers, but only for the basics, and not able to retain 50% of that number, it's clearly a danger that has to be looked at. He discloses that there are only 8 undergraduate medical programs. And so people want to get better opportunities and they leave. We can do better than that. We are only able to we are unable to retain over 50% of those we train. And he says, if this continues, Ghana will not achieve universal health coverage. Now, Suleimana is very clear. You know, that is his area of expertise that he spoke to us about, issues of climate change and our environment that is suffering the devastation because of galamsey. But he's looking to a Ghana where policy is informed by science. He wants a Ghana where public service is functional and not dysfunctional. A Ghana where young people have opportunities to work. He wants our biodiversity data, which we collected in 1965. We need to get back to that, to have accurate data about what galamsey, for example, has done to our environment. Our next guest, Ibrahim Mahama, is an artist. He is an author and founder. He was born in Tamale and studied painting and sculpture at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. He is best known for his sculptural installations that use draped jute sacks over architectural structures like the National Theatre in Accra and the Arsenal at the 2015 Venice Biennale. Mahama works with materials that tell stories of economy and global trade, which are critical areas of inquiry for him. In recent years, he has gained international recognition through the establishment of 3 cultural institutions in Tamale. Now watch that. The establishments are in Tamale. They are far away from the center here in Accra or one of the business capitals like Kumasi and Takoradi, where we have too much going on there. So he has the Savannah Center for Contemporary Arts, Red Clay Studio, and the Nkrumah Volini. Mahama's work has been exhibited in museums and biennales internationally. In 2017, Mahama became a fellow of the Dad Artists in Berlin program. There's a lot more that he has been up to. There's a lot more that the world has been tapping from this young man, who has literally on his own innovated and taken hope to hopeless communities in this country. Today, he says, how do we restore memory through cultural productions? Ibrahim Mahama, thank you very much for making the time to join us. Please unmute your mic.
Samson, thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you very much for having me.
And where are we reaching you from? I'm seeing the beautiful thing behind you. Great. Good to have you. So
Yes.
once again, we know that you are such a globetrotter, and we were so unsure that we could get you to sit down and speak to us today.
You know, anywhere I am in the world, anytime you reach out to me, I'll make time for it. So for me, this is such a pleasure. And also with the kind of distinguished guests that you have on your show, one cannot refuse. Even if you are in heaven or hell, you have to find the space and time for it.
Thank you for the privilege. And the duty bearers, you know, they are listening and watching this show, Newsfile. Particularly, they are happy when we take a pause from the plenty chatter and political discussions to do these kind of soul-searching introspection discussions that allow all of us to reflect. Please, let's hear you. How do we restore memory through cultural productions?
Thank you very much, Samson. Yeah, and thank you to our listeners and viewers and to all our colleagues out there and to my fellow distinguished guests on the show. It's been such a joy listening from Dr. Elikim till now. And I was somehow giggling when Elikim was talking about the medical sector and all that. And even before I begin, my brother is a trained neurosurgeon from Cuba. And even when he came back recently, the medical council wanted them to pay an amount of money for them to integrate them into the system. And it was such a challenge. Like, how do you spend thousands of dollars to train medical doctors in Cuba and other places, and they come back and you're asking them for petty change in order to integrate them in the system? So that's how come most often a lot of the doctors or practitioners also leave the country.
That's a very big challenge, and it's an issue that they have complained about. And Dr. Arthur Kennedy, who will join us shortly on this program, has had cause to complain about it, that there's a need to do something about that particular situation so that we don't continue to complain that as far back as 2005, Ghanaian doctors in New York exceeded the total number of doctors in Ghana.
Well, I'm not really surprised here because even as I'm speaking, there are only 2 neurosurgeons in the whole of the northern region. You know, Dr. Abbas and then my brother who just returned. So you can imagine if more than 5 million population, if you get a motor accident or something, the tendency of you dying is very high because there are very few people who can attend to those cases. So I guess that's why I wanted to talk about this, the idea of like repair, going back to like memory and what it can do for society in terms of, some of the problems that we're facing, I think it's an ideological crisis, you know? So I wanted to talk about that through cultural productions and institutions and all that. I think I can share my screen or something. Let me see if I can share the screen. Let me make it into.
I'm very sure many of you are familiar with Ibrahim Mohammed's, you know, trains and planes that have found their way into, you know, the part that some people will never have seen or have had access to, and turning some of these things into libraries for children to have very good memories. Yes, please, let's go.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it's on the screen.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So, yeah, thank you very much. So I want to start from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology where I studied. So I had my undergrad and MFA there and currently trying to finish a PhD. Of course, the KNUST, the arts program, which was introduced, was run for many years. And the program was, for a long time, was a bit quite conservative until a group of young professors led by Dr. Caricature and the Black Star Alliance group decided to radicalize it because at the time, there were certain art practices or forms which were not being taught within the art school. And also students had to really think within certain forms. You know, art is about the expansion of freedom because in the Ghana flag, in our anthem, we have the freedom and justice and all that. And that is one of the things that art embodies. the idea to be able to take something and transform it into another. So you have Dr. Caricature, Kisiedu Boafo, Georgia Prechum, you have people like Ajman Osei, who was the National Theatre Director and also the Dean of the Performing Arts School in Legon, who have all been very instrumental within these transformative points. When I decided to come to Tamale, the idea was to build a studio or an institution that could somehow allow for younger people to connect to the work of older people. So for instance, there are a lot of really important artists over time, from Abladi Glover, Kofi Dawson, many others who've done really significant work, which if you ask any Ghanaian child about these artists, they probably would not know anything about them. So for me, I thought that it was really important to use the institution or the studio as a space of repair. So you have this, it takes us to, for instance, the market. So also at the end of the day, when we're making art and culture is not so much about, it's not an elitist thing. At the end of the day, we have to find ways in which we can redistribute it. So I used to spend a lot of time going to the Malamata market and other markets around the country, talking with the women there about art and culture, collecting materials like the jute sacks that the cocoa board brings in for transportation of cocoa. And then, you know, when an object is used again and again over a long time, it begins to accumulate memory. And I'm very interested in the memory and how it can speak to us again in multiple timelines. So I would collect these materials and then I would use them to make large-scale installations around Europe. Also, I did it National Theatre and a couple of other spaces here in Ghana at the university, KNUST. My university was very, very kind to me for a long time. They really gave me space and freedom to practice in ways that if you were in Europe, you could not even do. So those really opened up, for instance, the paradigm to think about ways in which we could start thinking about building cultural institutions that could redistribute, let's say, cultural sensibilities. So it took me back to the history of Ghana in relation to the railway. After slavery had been abolished, when the railway was being built, particularly in the south, at the time when Ghana was the Gold Coast, there were a lot of people that were used as labor to build the railway. And you know, the British had built the railway basically just to extract resources. So it was a very colonial thing. So, and a lot of people from the north also contributed to the building of the railway. People were taken from the north. So from the images on the screen, you can see that there were a lot of people that were taken from the north that were used in building the railway. But the railway network never extended to the north. Yeah. So if you look at generations that have emerged over the last century, it's very difficult even to talk to kids up here about the ideas of technology around these things, because if you are not even familiar with these things, how does your imagination even open up to them? So I'm interested in ways in which we can take the residues of history and then we can transform it so that it can bring about new cultural imaginations and all that. But Samson, again, it's not so much about just building things. It's also about the idea of witnessing, because when archaeologists are excavating histories, mostly it's being done in isolation. But I also like the idea that what does it mean to be able to bring these cultural memories or like historical memories, like the railway lines, which would have been scrapped, and then bringing them all the way to the north where they never existed, but the labor is connected to it historically, and then allowing for school kids to witness the building of these things. Because there's nowhere in the world, even in the US, as you would even see like the building of these things. It's only limited to the workers who are doing that. But I'm really interested in how these archaeological exercises can bring about new kinds of memory, create new kinds of cultural memory. So one of the things that we did was that some of the trains, when I bought them, they had been cut into pieces. And these trains, of course, had been used in like the mines and other spaces. And I had to find the people who had cut the trains into pieces and then pay them to weld the entire train together again. And then for us to transport it all the way up north. So even here in this image, you can see that the train is crossing the Bupe, which was shown just now with the Galamsey and everything. So you can see that even as the train is somehow going through the landscape of the country in order for a search of a new cultural memory or new ideological space and all that, it's somehow crossing through all the contradictions that we're dealing with within our time. And when I remember when we got to Tamale, the idea was also to find ways in which we could combine that together with, for instance, these kinds of iconographies like mosque and other things, because we're a country of very strong faith. We're always talking about God and all that, but it's also very important to think about the embodiment of God within the things, the surroundings around that, even trains that we've abandoned. And again, now that these objects are in spaces which seem very alien, how do we make sure that the generation that is going to grow up, this is actively part of their memory in terms of how they inherit a new, because it's almost like a failure, a defunct of history, but we're somehow taking that and we're using that to build a new cultural repository that allows us to be able to think beyond time itself. And again, it's not just about, someone might argue, oh yeah, but it's because the people in the north, maybe they are so-called villagers, they've never seen a train line before. But even the white kids who their parents bring them to the institution and all that, at the end of the day, because it's accessible to everyone and you don't have to pay a dime when you come to it, everyone can experience it the same way. So these kids, they will not be allowed to, for instance, run on rail lines in Europe and other places. But within the cultural institutions or within ways in which we rethink about history, it allows us all to be able to access time the same way. So in this image, you see that we have, for instance, the expats kids excited jumping on the trains, the same as the kids coming from the schools who are doing that. And it reminds me about an image of India where the train is moving and you don't see the train and you just see the people around the train. There are things that we really have to think about in terms of how we redistribute cultural sensibilities. And in Tamale, one of the things that we do actively is to activate the trains by manual labor. So again, if you look at this in relation to history, how people were taken from places to go and build a rail line, but then the rail line never came to these places. What does it mean, again, to bring these objects, the residues of these objects, back into spaces, even if it's not just the north, but in the south, in Accra or other places? What does it really do? It's very important for us to think about those points. And Samson, at the end of the day, it's about play, because all that I'm talking about is very serious. But at the end of the day, what does it mean to the generation that comes afterwards? If there are kids in Jamestown or in Manguase or like in the Volta region or elsewhere who've never actually had a chance in order to be able to encounter these kind of cultural phenomena and all that, how does it shape the way they think about their being Ghanaian or being citizens of the world from a historical point of view? So inside the airplanes, as you rightfully spoke about in the first place, we use them as classrooms where our colleagues, people like Madi and others, are transforming them into like coding, computing spaces where we teach children how to build computers or how to code or how to fly drones or things like that. The question is that, what does it mean? What does it mean to be able to take an object which would have been lost in time or destroyed and then transform it into something that opens up, let's say, new imaginative points within another generation? So you can see that within our space, like within the institution, we have spaces like the Parliament of Ghosts, where we're even building the spaces, but we are using them at the same time. Because in architecture, when you're building something, normally you have to isolate it until it's done. But it's also important that young people, because we say we're building a country for young people, the majority of the people in this country are young. So at the end of the day, what does it mean even in terms of decision making? Because young people are not as irresponsible as most often the system makes it to be. People want to strive and people want to be actively part of decision making and all that. But when we start from an actively young age where we're building institutions and we integrate them into the fundamental aspect of the building, then they begin to understand that the system is being built for them. One day when they inherit it, they can cherish it and know what to do with it. So we work with a lot of schools here, from all the senior high schools to like primary schools and all that. And as I was talking about, we show them, we invite the schools, and then we walk them through the building. So it's almost as if they have commissioned us to build these institutions for them or for the generation that comes afterwards. And the institution, because the institution is also a living embodiment of what the ecosystems is. So if we're building an institution, it shouldn't just only be for human beings. We also have to move away from the anthropocentric point of view where everything is about the human. What about plants' life? So that's where Galamsey and all these things that come in. How do we respect life in itself beyond the human being into like the trains, the planes, the landscape, and everything that it comes with? So you'll see that it inspires us to build all kinds of spaces, greenhouses, spaces that allows for a combination between technological forms, historical forms, and like modern building techniques. We even go to as far as collecting old pots from the villages where they are more like archaeological objects. They look like dinosaur fossils, which transports us back into time, things like that. So how do we even use a pot from Tolong to somehow teleport our minds, a younger generation, into, for instance, 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth? What does it really mean in terms of thinking about fossil fuel and all the things that it has done for humanity in terms of the benefits and also the damages that it has done in terms of like climate concerns and all that. Furniture, which was made out of timber that was cut when the railway was being built in the early 20th century, going around the country, collecting these cultural artifacts and memories and restoring them within the active institution. So our institutions, again, are supposed to be spaces for repair. We're supposed to use our modern institutions in order to be able to restore these phenomena. And this is the last part of the slides where you have even like the smocks that we normally traditionally weave and wear here, where I'm doing a big project in the UK next year for an institution where we're redesigning the fabric, thinking about the cultural phenomena of these fabrics, what they mean within the institutional setting, and even extending it into a space like the Tamale Sports Stadium, where we rent the stadium and we work with over 400 and something people a day in order to be able to sew this material beyond the imagination that normally a weaver would engage this material in. So for me, it's very important when we are thinking about what this repair is. So the repair is not just with regards to, for instance, making a painting or making a sculpture, but it's a systematic thing that we're talking about, which involves infrastructure and all that. And I think there's a last but one image. So now the question is that now that we're talking about repair and all that, what does it mean for this younger generation, for kids to be able to take hold of this? So if kids can be able to go to institutions and take ownership of these institutions, give tours to their fellow kids through technology and all that, we're very lucky. The real Ibrahim, I always say the real Ibrahim Hama, Mr. Ibrahim Hama, Engineers and Planners, he gave us this engine from one of his old defunct airplanes, which these things are incredibly expensive. So when I bought the old airplanes, we could never find a jet engine. So these jet engines combined together with the drone tech and other things we're teaching the kids, gramophones and all kinds of archives and other things, creates these new cultural sensibilities again. And I think this also, I like to tell this story a lot because this is a yellow driver in COVID period. He brought two people, visitors from town to the Red Clay, and he was so excited because for him, he never knew that there was an institution like this in Tamale. And he closed work that day because normally we'd say that, oh, these people, like, because every day they work hand to mouth and all that. He went home, closed work for the day, and he brought all the kids from his house. And you can imagine all the kids. He put all the kids in this small tricycle, yellow. And he put a wood on both sides to make sure that they didn't fall out. So at the end of the day, the points that I'm making is that when we build these institutions which everyone can identify with and can access, they then also become the prophet for it and they can extend it. So if people like this can champion or can extend the institution to, for instance, kids within their community, and for instance, you cannot even get access to drinking water within your institution, then you realize that there's a problem with the system that we are largely contributing to. So this is the last image, and this is basically Red Clay, where you have the train line running through the institution. So the line, we can see it as some kind of a scar, but in the medical field, when a patient is injured and when they stitch it, it's somehow a repair of the body. The same way I think of as the line. The train line is almost acting as some kind of a scar tissue, which allows us to be able to repair, let's say, memory. It allows us to be able to think about ways in which we can rethink about cultural phenomena and what it can do for ideological growth within another generation. So in here, you can find studios, you can find cinema spaces, libraries, you can find residencies, you can find archaeological spaces, you can find greenhouses, the airplanes which embody these technological forms, drone tech, the trains, farms, all kinds of other things. So the point is that if we truly want the generation that comes after us to inherit a world that they can truly appreciate and they can also pass it on to another one, then how do we approach it?
Right.
Yeah, so I think I'll leave it here and then...
Ibrahim, and this is mind-blowing. The way your imagination works, this is mind-blowing. How do we restore memory through cultural productions? And you epitomize that. The red clay, that entire enclave, and the history that lives in that place is amazing. It's amazing. My only question to you, question to you is, how do you do this?
There's a question I also ask myself, Samson. How do we do this? Because it's very difficult, honestly. But the point is that we are constantly reminded of where we are coming from and also what is possible. I think for a lot of young people, I always tell them that don't think about what exists, but think about what you can produce yourself. That's the only thing that inspires us, because at the end of the day, you ask yourself, it's very difficult to get access to any kind of support infrastructure. You can get access to good roads that even go to the spaces around the country. You can get access to good drinking water. You can get access to constant energy and things like that. But at the end of the day, in us, for instance, I travel, I spend a lot of time traveling around the world, teaching and doing many other things. But the more important thing, when you're traveling around the world, you begin to realize that there are places that they invite you to come and teach and do things. I remember some years ago, one of my colleagues and I, Dr. Bernard Jackson, we went to Denmark for like 2 weeks to teach. Every day we'll go to a different school. And at the end of the day, I asked myself, but in Ghana, why can't we be doing this? Why, if you are like, if you think you are empowered, why can't you, even as a musician, like a filmmaker or whatever you are, you don't need to wait for the state apparatus to be able to do any of these things. Why can't on our own, of course, be able to do it? Because we are privileged. At the end of the day, I can complain as much as I want, but nonetheless, I don't think about the basic everyday survival. I don't wake up in the morning thinking that, oh, what do I eat today? Or in the next 1 year, what do I eat? At the moment where you find yourself in that sphere, you have to realize that you have transcended a certain boundary, and whatever that happens afterwards, it has to be a contribution towards your society and mankind at large.
All right. Thank you very much. And as I watch, and I'm getting a lot of messages from our viewers also, and I'm imagining the transformation that is going through these minds, these young minds, as they get the experience of red clay. One place, they are entering airplanes, jumping onto trains, and they are seeing so much, and it's helping them to imagine. Thank you very much, Ibrahim Mahama.
Thank you very much. My hope is that eventually these kinds of institutions will exist all around the country. And of course, it will inspire beyond culture, medicine, technology, ecology, all kinds of other things. The point about art is not just to stay within its boundaries, but to inspire all other disciplines. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Ibrahim Mahama is an artist, an author, and a founder, well sought after, and he has decided to focus this kind of attention, innovation, illuminating the minds of young people and getting them to be transformed in their thinking right there in Tamale. We go to our next speaker, whom you heard a while ago briefly.
We have the money and we have the expertise. We came here to sit with the decision makers to formulate policy to help us integrate us into the system. Where are the decision makers?
But it was there already. It's been there since morning.
Where are they? They are nowhere around here to listen to us. So now everything we talk about here is going to be second and third class. It's going to be washed out. and whatever is left is going to be passed on to the decision makers. Everybody comes in here and has an attitude that, oh, I got something better to do. Well, if this is the biggest now, if you're a business person and you know that there is a constituency that has the most amount of money and the most amount of expertise that you need into your business to make it work, I would have thought you would spend more time with that constituency to get them to do something. There is nobody here. The decision makers are not here. So we need to change this mindset. And if you would let the president know, this attitude and this arrogance about we are whiners, really? Who travels 3,000 miles to be a whiner? We could have been whiners from our constituencies. We didn't need to come here. So this attitude has to change. If you want to engage us, then be serious about engaging us, because we're not here to play.
And that is Kofi Koranting. He is a Ghanaian activist and a politician. Mr. Koranting graduated from Ghanaian primary and junior high schools before crossing the ocean to pursue a study in economics in London. He chose to complete his economic studies at New York University, where he earned a degree in economics and business. Kofi Koranting has remained active for the cause of the Ghanaians in the diaspora. Over the years, he has held several positions for this community, including Chief Executive Officer of the Progressive Alliance Movement, PAM, a US-based non-political advocacy group. You remember that group. That is the group that sponsored some of its members to take a suit to get the court to pronounce that Ghanaians living abroad are entitled to be registered where they live and to vote from where they live, as spelled out in the law. He was the first president of Ahemfie Association, a Ghanaian community-based organization fusing Ghanaian culture with American lifestyle and many more. Kofi Koranting carries within himself the fire of democratic ideals and is determined to be a mentor for Ghanaians to succeed within the borders of Ghana as well as throughout the diaspora. Kofi is no longer, perhaps if that was true, whining. He has been back in the country and seeking to be president. He speaks on the topic Towards the Ghana I Seek, which is the main theme for today's Change Speaker series. Kofi, welcome.
My good friend, Mr. Samson Anyenini, thank you so much. And with all the Newsfile crew and leadership, thanks for having me here. I'm inspired, Samson, by the speakers, my esteemed panelists. And what I have heard this morning, I'm blown away. It's a confirmation that it's worth it to keep fighting, because there is a better Ghana that we all seek, and it's worth it.
You are not alone. Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante says, what a refreshing morning. Gifty Ando Apia says, imagine that we have just 10 of Ibrahims in the north. The biggest part of solving our problems is how we think, and he is culturally shaping the minds of young people, and that's just super. Dr. Kwame Akufo-Addo Into is saying the Ibrahim Mahama presentation was very good, well thought out and presented, and he's asking whether Newsfile and Joy Management, we have thought about putting change speakers together in a book. Kofi Koranting, let's hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Samson. Let me just activate this thing. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak to Ghanaians on the theme of Towards the Ghana I Seek. Samson, I must thank you so much, the host of Newsfile, and of course, Kenan Sa, the Chief Operating Officer, for the invitation to speak on this Joy Change Speaker Series 6, Diaspora Edition. As an avid viewer of Newsfile, I am aware that guests should address issues bordering on life's lessons, especially to guide the youth, religious, social, cultural, governance, economic, management, job creation, law and justice, parliament, party politics, security, agriculture, topics needing attention and it's my firm belief that those in the diaspora and those at home, all the topics are intertwined and we must address each as it affects the other. Let's begin with the first point, life's lessons to guide the youth. No adult can seriously offer guidance to the youth in a nation where they are not offered hope and opportunity. All the other topics noted, governance, economic management, job creation, law and justice, parliament, party politics, security, agriculture, must be addressed first to offer the youth guidance, hope, and opportunity. The Newsfile platform suggests that current events should be reflected in a panelist presentation. Ghana has recently made international news with issues that directly affect all citizens of Ghana as well as the youth. The United States CBS network featured the citizens of Ghana and its youth on their premiere show called Sunday Morning. The focus of the story was how Ghana has become a landfill for the world's e-waste. In presenting the story, the journalist showed video of Ghana youngsters engaged in helping adults strip the carcasses of computers, printers, cell phones, and other technology. The goal is to salvage sellable parts before the useless plastic housing and contaminated glassware is left to rot in the once pristine land of Ghana. It showed Ghanaian youth who were not even of secondary school age burning the insulation from wires to retrieve the sellable copper, a process that produces noxious smoke and air pollution for those engaged and all around. The youth of this nation see this practice as their opportunity and hope. They are engaged in it out of necessity because the government of Ghana has and continues to fail to deliver for Ghanaians, their children, and the future of our nation. The reporter for CBS News noted that Ghana is also a repository of used clothes and tires from the thriving economies around the world. The burning of tires and the landfills of clothing each present a unique pollution challenge that leads to health problems for Ghanaians. Even the pristine air, land, and water of Ghana is now polluted. I mentioned earlier that all topics are intertwined. If we begin to unravel them, they all lead back to an inept, corrupt government. Can e-waste reclamation create sustainable livelihoods for the youth of Ghana? Not the way it's being performed now. Let's imagine that Ghana had a government committed to the well-being of its citizens, that government of Ghana would seek to modernize e-waste reclamation with investments in technologies, research, and development. It would seek out and invite international corporations to put in place clean, sustainable processes of e-waste reclamation. Ghana can create an industry out of e-waste reclamation with a government that is determined to protect the environment, offer opportunity for sustainable living wage jobs, and produce viable recycled exports. Can Ghana create an industry of exportable products from the used tires that now pollute our air, land, and water, causing irreparable damage to the health of our youth? I say yes, it can. A responsible actionable government can invest in research, technology, and development to turn used ties into recycled rubber building blocks, beams, benches, and more that can be exported back to the world that sent it? Can Ghana become a leader in recycling used clothes into new textiles? Again, I say yes, it can. A responsible, actionable government can invest in research, technology, and development to turn used clothes into thread, textiles, and cloth with innovative, pollution-free, sustainable processes. It takes a government of vision, action, and commitment. Remember, all things are intertwined. This brings us to the scourge of illegal mining, as our friends and panelists have said. Again, an industry that attracts not only the young, but all ages of Ghanaians who lack hope and opportunity. Galamsey is a glaring example of the failure of an inept government that is mired in corruption. Every election, a solution is promised. Every year, Galamsey continues to offer dangerous jobs to Ghanaians while officials look away and spend their illegal payments. Every Ghanaian knows how and why Galamsey occurs, and the damage it does to the clean water, land, and air of the nation. It is all intertwined, a two-party system that allows each other to profit as they exchange administrations, leaving Ghanaians and its youth to fall deeper and deeper into poverty and despair. The annual salary, perks, and ex gratia of one MP equals more than the wages of 55 hardworking Ghanaians. I believe that all things are intertwined, and the two controlling parties of Ghana, who have traded power between themselves for over 3 decades, are inexplicably one and the same, a government of neglect, Samson. On international news headlines, Ghana is gaining infamy. To go along with the Ghanaian children of the e-waste, CBS News featured Ghana again in a story about our prized agricultural export, cocoa. In the US, the shocking revelation of the story was that a preeminent candy company, Mars, was buying Ghana cocoa harvested by children as young as 5. The CBS reporter visited multiple farms to be sure it was not an isolated incident, and at each of the farms visited, found children as young as 5 wielding machetes and harvesting cocoa in the blistering heat. Ghana has been in the news for all the wrong reasons. Ghanaian cocoa, a prized export in demand throughout the world, has suffered a black eye on the international stage. Is it intertwined with offering hope and opportunity to the youth? It is. The problem, my brothers and sisters, is that we as a people do not want 5-year-olds to have the opportunity to sweat as laborers for substandard or any wage. We want Ghanaian 5-year-olds and all ages, even into adulthood, to have the hope and opportunity afforded to them by a modern, well-rounded, targeted educational system. Are we proud of cocoa production and the support we give to farmers? Yes, we are. However, we are not proud of being an exporter on the backs of 5-year-old children working in the fields. Can Ghana do better? Yes. We need an agricultural ministry that is committed to supporting farmers, one that institutes innovative, sustainable practices which will make Ghana a leader in the supply of food products to Africa and the world. Today, the world is craving superfoods such as acorn squash, purple rice, turnips, sweet and purple potatoes, and other hardy vegetables that can be grown here in Ghana. Ghana can offer our youth the hope and opportunity that comes with plentiful, diverse foods, as well as becoming a major agricultural exporter. It is all intertwined. The government of Ghana must be dedicated to healing the scars that they have ignored for over the last 30 years, pollution from galamsey, e-waste, used clothing, and used ties, and turn them into opportunity and hope for our youth. The story is intertwined with all that is wrong in Ghana, a government of neglect with ruling parties who have one mission in mind: to create generational wealth for themselves and their families, not Ghanaians as a whole. Let's bring the government into focus in this discussion with the recent headline: Broke Ghana registers 618 delegates for COP28 in Dubai. Ghana, by all international monetary standards, is bankrupt, yet the government of corruption registered 618 delegates to attend a global warming conference in Dubai. At the conference, Ghana made a commitment to reduce methane emissions. All things are intertwined, right? Well, does that mean that Ghana is committed to stopping the burning of used ties and insulation from e-waste wires? You know as much as I do, of course not. Let's be realistic. The intent of the president and registered guests of Ghana to the Dubai conference is to live a lifestyle that the average Ghanaian cannot imagine. One day's worth of food and beverage for the esteemed Ghanaian global climate change fighters costs more than hundreds of households in Ghana for a year. Should Ghana be concerned and engaged in global climate discussion? Yes. How? Well, by electing engaged government officials who are concerned with serving the Ghanaian people and providing a future of hope and opportunity. Singapore and Dubai are examples of what is possible when the government invests in its people and not in enriching its officials. The government of Ghana and the next president must commit to a new economy with a foundation of a revitalized educational system with modern school buildings. No more teaching under trees. Our schools must offer well-rounded general studies programs that include sports, music, and arts facilities. Each district or region should feature premier schools for committed students and teachers who want to concentrate on technology. These will include the laboratories and facilities for exploration and invention of robotics, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, space travel, augmented reality, as well as computer coding and networking. Ghana must lead Africa in sustainable innovations, research, science, medicine, advanced agricultural and food processing, and exploration, as well as become a center of finance, banking, and marketing. The government must commit to building and funding schools for essential trades for those who want to pursue careers as plumbers, electricians in urban planning, and as heavy machine operators, auto mechanics, computer repair, broadcasting, visual arts, performing arts, teaching, and government services. A strong society on the move requires an investment in its people, not its government officials or family or their families. Ghana gains its independence through the hard work and determination of people with visions and dreams. They did not envision creating an aristocracy or royalty. They imagined a nation where every citizen could be free. I know the first question on your mind is, Samson, how do you pay for this? I know, It is a fair question. Remember, everything is intertwined. The government of Ghana and the two-party system have redirected the monies needed to create a society on the move into the coffers of an entrenched bureaucracy which feeds itself. It is easier than one might expect to move from a government of neglect towards the Ghana I seek. These ideas can be paid for by first electing honest stakeholders who share the Ghana we seek. It begins by reinventing the government, rooting out corruption, eliminating ex gratia and Article 71 payments. It continues with limiting the number of ministries and staff, cutting the bureaucracy of the office of the president, auditing and eliminating wasteful spending and graft. We must also seek corruption-free private-public partnerships with Ghanaian companies as well as international companies that focus on cutting-edge technologies and sustainability in manufacturing, production, agriculture, and energy, of course. We must encourage corporations engage in pollution remediation to clean up our damaged land, waters, and oceans caused by the incompetency of the last 30 years of corrupt governments while becoming the world's leader as an innovative, pollution-free society. We must end the practice of e-waste dumping and encourage viable, clean solutions to successfully process and recycle e-waste. We must end the practice of importing used tires and clothing from the world without solutions. Ghana, by the way, is not the world's landfill. Used tires can be recycled cleanly into viable exports without destroying the health and environment of Ghanaians. The same for clothing. There are companies from India to Texas, USA, who are using innovative pollution-free processes to turn used clothing into exportable materials. Startups like this will avoid Ghana as long as the government of corruption remains in place. We must end illegal mining and demand that all permitted mining be performed pollution-free with 100% reclamation processes in place. The model of Ghana must be a robust leader in education, innovation, arts, tourism, and entertainment with an ethical, welcoming government that enforces the laws to protect the health and well-being of all its citizens. The ghost hospital system and uncompleted housing projects are living shadows of what our incompetent, dishonest, corrupt government looks like. Instead of a ghost hospital system with thousands of beds that serve no one, Ghana can and will build a world-class hospital system that will encourage our healthcare professionals to stay home and not seek greener pastures in Europe and Middle East and the Americas. This brings us to another recent headline in the news. Contractors abandon new Eastern Regional Hospital site over unpaid funds, December 12, 2023, as reported on Ghana Web. It tells the story of yet another addition to the ghost hospital system that the last couple administrations continue to build. The proposed 600-bed hospital for Eastern Region is less than 30% completed and was scheduled to open at the end of this month. It is another glaring example of the government of neglect. We do not know how many jobs the 600-bed hospital would have created. What we do know, though, is that these educated, trained healthcare professionals and doctors who would have staffed this facility will join the millions in the diaspora and help build a world-class healthcare for other nations. I touched upon education. Remember, all things are intertwined. As Ghana grows its educational system, it would also grow its healthcare system. Ghanaians deserve world-class healthcare. Our best and brightest are forced to leave their homeland to seek careers providing world-class healthcare for others. I thank you for the attention as I offered you a glimpse towards the Ghana I seek. I look forward to your questions and an ongoing dialogue towards the Ghana we all seek. Let us assure our youth that we can have a government that works towards independence, freedom, hope, and opportunity for one and all. Samson, God bless our homeland, Ghana.
Thank you very much, Kofi Koranting, with that presentation. We've done quite a bit of time with the presentation. So let's continue to chew on. And we believe that as the most significant people also watching and listening, we will do what is right. We are taking a quick break here. And Euraba Opoku Bediakon says that these are the caliber of people we need on your show. Very inspiring. And she went to quote Sulemana Isifu, saying that state institutions should work in the strategic interest of Ghanaians. It says Sulemana, unfortunately, heads of these institutions are appointed by the government of the day, and they are there to please their masters. How do we get a list of all of those who are licensed for this so-called community mining and so on? Prince Henry, sending us a message from Koforidia, says that the sad aspect of this, okay, Prince, we are not discussing lithium. I think you are listening elsewhere and sending us these messages. Please don't. Thank you very much. And for all of you sending messages saying that you are taking in a lot of refreshing inspiration. That is the purpose of the Joy Change speaker series. We'll be right back with our last two guests. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, and this is your special edition. This is Joy Change speaker series, Diaspora edition. Leila says, I like it. Great lineup of speakers. Thumbs up to Kofi Koranting and all the speakers. Well done to the team for putting this super group together. Shamima Muslim says, it's been a brilliant morning of thought-provoking presentations. Ibrahim's work is truly important, and when an individual's vision can be potentially transformational, one wonders governments continue to fail its people and at worst frustrate those you truly want to contribute. Let's continue to give these people the opportunity to share. Let's get straight to our next speaker. She's been decorated globally. And I say global citizens for a good reason. Nana Oforiatta Enyim, Fosuya Oforiatta Enyim, is a writer, filmmaker, and art historian who lives and works here in Accra, Ghana. So you ask the question, what do we mean when we say Diaspora Edition? We're talking about people who have interacted with the globe. She's founder of the Eno Institute of Art and Knowledge, through which she has pioneered a Pan-African cultural encyclopedia, a mobile museum project, and curated Ghana's first pavilion at the Venice Biennale. She published her first novel, The Godchild, with Bloomsbury in 2019, and with Penguin in German in 2021. She has produced award-winning films for museums such as the Tate Modern, LACMA, and the New Museum, and lectures a course on history and theory at the Architectural Association in London. She was a 2018 Global South Visiting Fellow at Oxford University and was appointed to the Advisory Council of Oxford University's Cultural Programme in 2020. She has accomplished. I'd like to pause here. She speaks to us on a future integrated educational and cultural landscape. And I thank you very much for making time to be with us on Joy Change Speaker Series.
Hi, thank you for having me. And thank you to all my fellow speakers as well for their contributions.
Great. We are happy and Ghanaians are excited watching and listening to these refreshing presentations that cause us to reflect and to also look deep into ourselves and see what we can do to improve our circumstances. Please, let's hear you.
Okay, so I'll just speak a little bit about the work that I've done because I'm sure many people on here don't know or not familiar with the work that I'm doing. So I have an organization in Ghana that's based between Accra and Ebri. It's called the Anno Institute of Arts and Knowledge. And I started this institution at quite a young age, 21 years ago now. At the time, I was studying African art history in London. And at the time, African arts was still termed as primitive, as, fetish. We still had exhibitions of so-called primitive arts. When you went to exhibitions of African arts in, the metropolis of America, of Europe, it was often in glass cases. There were no descriptions. It was just, object from West Africa. All of the contemporary, at the time, contemporary art, African art was just beginning to be shown in mainstream institutions, but they were all under the banner of African art exhibitions. There weren't any really showcases of individual artists. They weren't contextualized. And so my aim very much when I started this institution was to bring African art into the center of global discourse and to make it equal to any other art in the world. And also when I would come home, I'm from Chebi in Achimabwakwa. When I would come home, and I'd go to Afashia, like the Ohum, the Odwira, I would see that art was not separate from life. It was very integrated. It was very much part of life. And I wanted to bring this sense of oneness that we had developed over thousands of years into the art sphere, which to that point was very much in white cube spaces, galleries, etc. And so I started with the curation of exhibitions and making of films, first in London and then in Ghana. And I did this for about 15 years or so of curating, with every exhibition trying to move our art more and more into the center of global discourse, which kind of the pinnacle of which was the Ghana Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which Ibrahim Mahama was also part of. And it was a huge success. We had such an impact on the global world stage. But at this stage, I asked myself, it was almost like, because I'd been to the Venice Biennale when I'd first started my career. And at the time, there was one African pavilion for the whole continent of Africa. And it was on the margins, like half an hour walk from the main centers. And I said to myself, as a very young person at the time, one day I will do a pavilion here. It will be of Ghanaian art and it will be at the center. Once having achieved this, I began to question myself, because the impact then in Ghana, along with other things that were happening here at the time, was that the Ghanaian art scene became more successful, became more sustainable to a certain extent, but it was mimicking the structures of the West, which at the moment is the extreme commercialization and capitalization of the art world. And this was quite in contradiction to what actually had attracted me to the arts and to the culture, this sense of oneness of all things, this very kind of deep-rooted spiritual knowledge of self that was expressed through our cultural expression. And so I went back to the drawing board, which I had been doing anyway through the Pan-African Cultural Encyclopedia that Samson mentioned, and through a project that I had started, which I called the Mobile Museum Project, which was a museum which was a project that took the museum into communities. As we all know, we have a national museum, which was closed for many, many years. And even when it's open, it speaks primarily to school children, to tourists, to those who already are familiar with art. And I really wanted to bring this idea of art, which is so much part of our culture, back into the community. Of course, it already exists there with things like the Afasia, but I wanted to create a kind of bridge between our classical and our historical arts institutions and the contemporary ones that had been imported. With the Mobile Museum, I started delving deeper and deeper into our Indigenous knowledge systems. I started working more closely with children and workshops, as well as community leaders and members. And had a lot, this was probably the most fulfilling of all the projects that I've done. And to me, the most successful. It maybe wasn't as loudly successful as some of the others, but in terms of engagement, in terms of exchange, in terms of co-working with community members, in terms of what we learned, there was so much there. And one of the things that kept resonating with me again and again, I started my journey as a cultural historian because I really felt that I had to go back and excavate what had been lost, what had been taken from us through the colonial encounter. In doing the work that I was doing and doing this excavation, I realized actually not so, of course, a lot had been taken, but a lot was still there. It wasn't that we had been robbed of our culture. It wasn't that we had been stripped. It wasn't that things had been taken away from us. It was that it had gone deeper underground, that it was more protected, and that within our knowledge systems, we had mechanisms of protection as well. And so I went again deeper and deeper into these Indigenous knowledge systems, and I found some of them were incredibly structured. And some of them were incredibly sophisticated as well. They included things like, mathematics, science. They included knowledge of nature, knowledge of the mind, knowledge of the soul. They were so deep. They were so multifaceted. And I don't know how, any of you felt, but I do remember when I was a young, very young person at school, I felt very much that the schooling, and I went to very good schools. I'm very grateful for the education that my parents gave to me. But I did feel a sense of the education that I was getting was taking me further and further away from myself rather than back into myself, back into a kind of sense of being rooted in myself. And so I found that these Indigenous knowledge systems that we had developed over thousands and thousands of years gave us a direct roadmap into a sense of dignity, a sense of self-knowledge, a sense of resonance. And, there were things that existed, for example, like schools for leaders, where leaders needed to go through steps of accountability in order to become the leaders that that the people deserved them to be. And obviously, we look at our kind of political landscape at the moment, and there's so much, especially from young people, there's so much unrest, there's so much thirst for accountability, there's so much thirst for connection. And if you look back into our Indigenous knowledge systems, these systems are actually accounted for. And so the next step of my institution, we've had educational mechanisms like cultural leadership fellowships, we've had residencies, etc. But for us, the next step was really going further back and integrating some of these systems that we'd uncovered through our Mobile Museum project, through our Cultural Encyclopedia project. And so we started with the building of a school, including a permaculture farm and Indigenous agricultural methods. And with this school, we're really trying to pioneer a new pedagogy or new system that includes some of the things that, like I say, have not been lost, but have just gone underground. You know, when you look back at the colonial papers that are readily available in archives, they're written very, very overtly that in order to control us better or to be able to rule us better, they had to destroy our cultural beliefs, our cultural values. And, you know, I can't remember there's one very, very famous quote that once you take away their culture and their cultural values, you don't have to oppress them anymore. They'll learn to oppress themselves or something along those lines. And I feel like we are in this kind of moment in time right now. We've kind of moved out of the post-colonial moment or movement, you know, that saw incredible writers like Ama Ete Edu and F.O. Sutherland, etc., Otikwe Oke, you know, that saw post-colonial thinkers like Kwame Nkrumah and J.B. Dankwa, and Kwame Jetchi and Kwesi Weredu, you know, all these people that were trying to make sense and trying to create a new future out of what, you know, and also trying to connect with the past and trying to create new paradigms for a new future out of this post-colonial moment. But I feel like we've moved on from that now. We've moved on to reacting to the colonial moment into a very new paradigm that connects with a lot of movements that are happening across the global South. We see at the moment a deep, deep, deep failure of Western systems, whether it's of government, whether it's of economics, whether it's in the arts world. Things are just not working. They are no longer the seeming role models of civilization that they've posited themselves as for so long. And so what are the solutions within our own systems? And this is what we are now trying to not just excavate, but also codify and also put out into the world so that others may be able to build foundations on them. And again, I think we're doing that for people who are already, you know, graduates and in the research stage, etc. But for me right now, the most important thing is going right to the beginning so that children that come in the future, you know, our children, our children's children, don't have to climb the same mountains that we had to climb, that they can start at ground zero with a sense of self, with a sense of dignity, with a sense of connection, you know, within our Indigenous knowledge systems. You know, right now there's, you know, everybody's talking about conservation, everybody's talking about, you know, ecological protection. Within our Indigenous knowledge systems, all of this was already written in, you know, whether it's respect for Asasia, all different things. And so how do we excavate and codify these methodologies and present them to a new generation in a way that they can also connect with, because it's so deeply enshrined within our DNA and within our cells? That's in brief the work that I'm doing.
That's breathtaking. And from what you say, one can only say that it's a good feeling that all hope is not lost. For as long as our indigenous knowledge and the way many young people today are just getting into cultures without any caution. So that suggests to me that's a lot of hope for this country. So how are you going about these humongous projects? Because these must be intensive projects.
Yeah, they are. And I just want to add also that I'm not kind of advocating for a nostalgic, you know, just looking at the past where everything was golden and everything was perfect. That's not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for like a conscious excavation, you know, taking what was good and leaving behind the things that are harmful. I'm not saying that, you know, once upon a time, everything was perfect, but I'm saying that we shouldn't throw out everything that was of value because we tell ourselves it's evil or it's fetish or it's, you know, whatever we've been indoctrinated into thinking about our own culture. And so in terms of the steps, I mean, I'm quite an ambitious person, and I have quite a lot of capacity within myself in terms of energy, in terms of ambition. I've built a lot of kind of resources and networks in terms of relationships across the world. And with all of that, I am trying to, and also I'm not doing short-term thinking. Like everything that I'm doing is really for future generations and is also rooted in the work of my ancestors. I'm not thinking about achieving everything that I'm achieving in my, whatever lifespan or lifetime that I have. For example, when I started the Pan-African Culture Encyclopedia, there was, people were asking, how are you doing a 54-volume encyclopedia? But I'm going to do what I can with it in the lifetime that I have, but I'm also trying to put in mechanisms that everything that I'm doing will outlive me. And that's also why I'm looking at working more with young people, because this is not for me, this work. It's not for my peers. It's for us, yes, and it's for our ancestors, and it's for the people that follow us.
And looking at some of the things that, how you've been recognized. You've been a recipient of various awards and honors. You've been named one of the Apollo 40 under 40, one of the 50 African trailblazers by the African Report. You one of 12 African women making history in 2016, and one of 100 women of 2020 by OK Africa. You received the 2015 Art and Technology Award. I have mentioned that. So how does someone with such an accomplishment say, let me go back to this small place and corner in Ghana and focus on the Anno Institute?
I mean, the accomplishments is not why you work, right? It's not the reason that you get up in the morning and do your work. I think, I'm driven by a desire, like a deep desire to, leave the world a better place than I entered it. I'm driven by a passion to, I see so much potential in this corner, like you say, of the world that I come from. In Ghana, I see so much beauty, I see so much potential. And every single day, that potential is not fulfilled. That beauty is kind of covered with muck and with dirt. And I'm like, but I see it underneath all of this. It's there and it's shining so bright. And I have some capacity and some potential to uncover that. And so why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I get up every single day and do my utmost best to do that? All the kind of things that you get, it's nice in a way that your work is not sitting in a vacuum somewhere, not doing anything. It's nice, but that's not why you're doing the work that you're doing. It's almost, but I wouldn't say it's by the by, because it does encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. But the reason that I'm doing the work that I'm doing, and that I will continue doing it till I draw my last breath, is comes from something much deeper than that. And it's very connected to the soil that that I'm from.
Great. Thank you so very much. We are certain that many are inspired by the story you tell and for the things that you do. I'm receiving a number of messages on the back of your presentation, and I'm going to share them right after this break that we are going to. And Nana Ofosua Oforiata Ayim, if you want to read a bit more about her, one thing I read about her that challenges me is that she was the principal investigator on the Action for Restitution to Africa program. She was awarded Woman of the Year award in Ghana in 2021. And guess what? She got the Dan David Prize, the world's biggest history prize, in 2022. We just showed you a publication of that a while ago. Thank you so very much for your time. We take a quick break. We'll return with our very final change speaker. You're welcome back, and we go straight away to our very final change speaker. Dr. Arthur Kobina Kennedy is no stranger to you. He's family physician, author, and activist. He was first seen on the Ghanaian political scene as a young student leader during the economic crisis in the 1980s, when he had rants with the Rawlings-led PNDC military junta about the way the country was being governed. As a result, he was forced into exile in the United States, where he completed his medical studies. In 2008, Dr. Arthur Kennedy became the chair of the Communications Committee of 2008 MPP campaign team. He is also a one-time presidential aspirant for the New Patriotic Party. He was said to be the man with the most and best ideas, and yet he lost it because he didn't have money. He is an author of 2 books, including the famous Chasing the Elephant into the Bush, and has over 100 publications. He speaks to us on the problem with Ghana. We'll go straight to him because we have very limited time. Dr. Arthur Kennedy, please take it away.
Good morning. I feel like Henry VIII telling one of his last wives, I shall not keep you for very long. I thank you for this opportunity, and my background has already been explained. I wanted to thank a few people who have been significant in my life. First, Ghana Medical School, that still gave me a chance despite the fact that I missed my interview. My friend and mentor, Dr. Prempe, as well as my roommate, Professor Amwatia Japan of Yale, who refused to let me give up on my dream of becoming a doctor, as well as those who saved my life during my 2 exiles, Nana Breford, the Senavos, and Chairman John Belson. I come to this with the touchstone of vandalism and the Bible. I was, as you know, a Legon student who didn't graduate. And when I told one of my friends that, he says, of course you graduated. You graduated in a Luther with distinction. So let me debunk a few myths before I go on to the main points I want to make. First, I've heard a lot of Ghanaians, including some of your speakers, talk about constitutional reforms. Unfortunately, our problem is not constitutional reforms or ideas. Indeed, when you talk about ideas from Nkrumah's 7-year development plan up to Nada's SHS, we've had ideas. The problem is execution. And to show that, I have here in my hand a copy of Ghana's 1992 Constitution, about 350 pages. That's in my left hand. Then in my right hand, there's a copy of the US Constitution, including the Articles of Confederation. And this is less than 100 pages. You can see them side by side. 250 years and counting. And they have a constitution about a third the one that we have. Our problem, therefore, is not our constitution. We also talk about the fact that, old leaders are destroying our country. Our problem is not that we have old leaders. We have bad leaders. Let me give you a couple of examples. William Pitt the Younger became UK Prime Minister at the age of 24, ruled for 24 years, and he was one of their best prime ministers. Konrad Adenauer gained the German chancellorship after World War II at the age of 76, and he ruled into his late 80s, and is considered one of their best chancellors. People say we are a young nation. Well, in 1979, when Rawlings burst on the scene, in China, somebody else burst on the scene, the Deng Xiaoping. In 15 years, Deng Xiaoping was done, and the policies he in place lifted 600 million people out of poverty. And Rawlings still has 6 years to do boom speeches and do vindictive politics. People say we have a bad character as Ghanaians. Not true. Every year, thousands of Ghanaians get on planes and travel all around the world. When they get there the next year, they show up to work on time, they obey the rules, they drive within speed limits. The problem is not the Ghanaian, it is the systems that we are running. So now what are our problems? First, I think we have weak institutions. And let me give you just a couple of examples. Our Electoral Commission was weakened by the removal on Trump charges of some of its members with the appointment of partisans to take their place. Our Auditor General Domilovo was blatantly removed by the president with the shameful connivance of our own Supreme Court because they delay. Second, there is pervasive corruption. People don't know that, but Nkrumah's government was almost stillborn because of the cocoa corruption scandal that took Ohinijan to jail. General Ankara resigned. We know of Kutu and Kalabule. We know of NDC's Kansem and Mabry and Johnson, as well as the Donkumi privatizations. And there's Kofor's Wawa remarks and the selling of airplanes. As for Nada, where do we start and where do we end? It is uncountable. Then the next thing is the absence of a meritocracy. You look at school admissions, awards of scholarship that some of the speakers have referred to, and appointments of government officials. There is no meritocracy. And all you have to do is to watch the hearings of parliament when we're trying to appoint ministers. Then there is the sidelining of diasporans. China, India, and many other countries lean on their diasporans. And here in Ghana, we know that it was the arrival of a diasporan, Francis Kwame Nkrumah, who abandoned his studies. That was the tipping point of our struggle for national independence. Yet we continue to ignore our diasporans. Then, of course, there is the bad leadership, which is the elephant in the room. We have vindictive leadership. To sum up, Dankwa should not have died in prison. Nkrumah and Buzia should not have died in exile. The general should not have been shot without due process. We shouldn't have collapsed the businesses of Apino, Kowus, and B.A. Mensah, who might be rivaling Dangote if we didn't do that. Then there is non-inclusive governance. Friends, family and friends govern, with the Chebi Mafia currently dominating most of our positions. Then we have policies devoid of equity and compassion, allowing a newborn mother who is bleeding to death to die because she cannot buy fuel for an ambulance. It's not the policy of a compassionate government. Allowing people to die because they cannot get dialysis, and the dialysis unit owes a few million cedis in debt, when we can spend $400 million putting up a cathedral. It's not what a compassionate government should do. And we have selfish leaders. Indeed, in the old days, people used to be ashamed of corruption, so they private it secretly. Now they do it blatantly. And the last one, our leaders are bad, but we are unpatriotic citizens. We accept bribes in order to vote. We defend our party leaders regardless of what they do. As somebody said in a video I saw, quote, Mahama Dumsono de Anu Eshepa, Nananadu de Ane de Daboko. And this was a Ghanaian speaking. So now let's talk about solutions. I think that talking about institutions, they must be stronger. Obama was right that Africa needs not strong men, but strong institutions. But the institutions must be built by men, like John Marshall did in his ruling on Marbury versus Madison in 1803, like Tuli Madonsela did when he took down Zuma of his own ANC party, or her own ANC party in 2016, like Justice Kosa and others did when they freed the Kolongugu bombers and Nkrumah was so upset he sacked them. So that is how you build strong institutions. To tackle pervasive corruption, Lee Kuan Yew said, we must punish the big fish, and he was right. There must be transparency in asset declaration. We must reform our political parties with public financing, annual auditing, and the banning of bribery in voting. Then we must also probe all those who have held office in the Fourth Republic. And we must mobilize public opprobrium. As they say, public sentiment is everything. If you recall, when the president decided to pay his wife and the second lady allowances, it was public opprobrium that shamed the thieves into returning the money. Public opprobrium is an underestimated, underutilized method. Then we must have meritocracy. When the MPP says we have the men, we should put the men forward. We are better than what we see. Then including diasporans, all what we have to do is think of Nkrumah and Osei Tutu and think of how much money Indians as well as Ghanaians send back home. And Deng Xiaoping, when he was starting his reforms, he said, I only need ideas from you, the World Bank. As for the money, the Chinese in the diaspora will bring it. And as the Akan proverb says, no matter how long a piece of log stays in water, it will never become a crocodile. Diasporans care about Ghana, and those who have destroyed Ghana mostly live in Ghana. On bad leadership, I say, revenge is the Lord's. Let us leave that to God. We must have inclusive leadership. As Lincoln said, forming his cabinet in 1861, including all his enemies, he said, our nation is in crisis and we need our best men. We must practice policies of equity. Lyndon Johnson was told, if you do civil rights, we'll lose the South for a generation. And he said, but if we will not do these things, what will be the point of the presidency?
Right.
Those and Nkrumah building all those schools. As for selfless leadership, Angela Merkel living in the same apartment for 16 years, Nkrumah dying penniless, Jose Mujica living in his rundown lodgings and refusing to accept pension. So I say the citizens must call out bad leaders. We must support good people like Frimpong Boateng, Martin Amidu, and Domilovo. And we must call out bad things. We must pay our taxes, and we must vote patriotically. Okay. And our religious leaders must be exemplary.
All right.
I think, in conclusion, I can say that only Ghanaians can change Ghana, and we are the men we have been waiting for. So to demonstrate that, let's go back to what Ephraim Mahmoud did in Yeranara Yasasini. My voice is bad, but you all join me. Yenara Yasasini, Yenabo de Maye, Mujana Nananum Shegu Nyade to or Maye. Edu mene wososo, sebe yebiatwaso, yebiatwaso kotun krane ne apese minkuminya, edi ebremu amaya sasi hundo atuse. Omayi sebe yo, omayi senye yo, oyese na ose, omanfo branetre, omayi sebe yo.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dr. Arthur Kobina Kennedy is our last speaker, and we want to thank all of you so very much. Mary Spew, Dr. Elikem Tamaklo, Ibrahim Mahama, Nana Oforiata, the three of them, all fellows of the African Leadership Initiative West Africa, the Aspen Group. Thank you also very much. And thank you, Kofi Koranting, Sulemana Isifu, as well as who else is left? That's all. Thank you very much. I'm Samson, Lardy, Anyenini. This has been another refreshing edition, as most of your messages continue to say, including one from our friend from Koforidia, whom I mistakenly read and a long message. Thank you very much. This has been Joy Change Speaker Series 6, the Diaspora edition. Join me tomorrow, as always, Sunday, 2 p.m. on The Law, my weekly legal clinic. And I have very good friends, lawyers of Lawyer Akoto Ampao, speaking about law practice, the Akoto Ampao example. Have a good afternoon.